Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Beers with Bill. Um, Mike, thank you for your efforts on trying to track down people to be on the show.
No problem.
Uh, since I didn't have a guest, I decided to pull stuff out of my cellar tonight. And for those of you who have managed to get them to try to see how the difference is between when I put them in and the way they are now. And my co-host tonight, Mike Brookfield, he had graciously volunteered to talk with me.
This is gonna be fun. I've never really done. I've had a cellar beer, but I've never had the opportunity to try it before and after. So this should be pretty interesting, and especially on these styles.
Yeah,
each style is different. So,
well,
yeah,
they're my favorite style. Plus, they were the ones that I could find easily in the cellar. And so Nessie's Bevy is a counterpoint, wee heavy, 6.6%. And like I said, the original brewing notes, because I talked to Graham, were cherry on the front tone, followed by caramel, light smoke, and earthy tones. And this has been sitting in my cellar almost since the same time I put the Doppelbock in, so about the same length of time.
huh? Yeah, it's a lot less. It's not boozy whatsoever. The alcohol booziness has definitely pretty well dropped off to nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. Definitely the earthy tones, caramel, definite huge malt. I'm having difficulty describing the malt.
So in the malt, I'm getting the back tone of Turkish coffee before it goes into the light smoky tone and then to some earthiness.
Yeah. Maybe a bit of chocolate. I don't know. I'm still working on that, describing the location of my.
There's definitely no sweetness left in it.
No, it's pretty well gone to pure malty.
Yeah.
Flavors. You have that's what Cellaring does a bunch of things.
Yeah.
Gets rid of booziness. Any like cloying sweetness will mellow really right out. And also you'll start getting a lot more of the yeast characteristics in there as well, because any residual sugars, no matter what, that bottle conditioning works for a reason, because there's always residual yeast.
Yeah.
So having it sit, even though it's at a cold temperature, you're letting it cellar for a really long time, so that yeast is going to do something, and it's going to start chewing up that sugars, any residual sugars, and more of the yeast character is going to come out, and you'll start getting some flavors you didn't have before.
Yeah. So this is actually at 6.6, a little bit low to be throwing into a cellar.
Yeah.
However, I'm impressed it's come out really, really well.
It has. Yeah, typically you sell a really high. The typically cellaring really high boozy, high alcohol content beers is more on the preservative side of things, just to make sure it can last that long, primarily. Yeah. There are other, like with smoky tones and whatnot, that also helps as a preservative, but
yeah,
like you wouldn't cellar a nice session pale ale, because that really, number of reasons you wouldn't do that. When cellaring, hop character tends to mellow out. Oxidation becomes more of a risk, and that typically happens with dry hopped beers and whatnot. So with really high alcohol content, it preserves. The booziness drops out. The maltiness will come really far forward. The sweetness drops out. You get a lot more complex flavors as you leave it, because the beer has time to just kind of settle out and mature, kind of like everything, I guess.
Yeah. And I pulled these out of the cellar on Sunday. Because when you disturb anything that you've put in a cellar, it's like waking it up. You need to give it 24 hours to sort of go, okay, I don't know why you did this to me, but all right, I'll settle down.
And some things you think cellaring, kind of like storing wine. It's sure, but with beer, you actually store it upright. Because you want the yeast to settle to the bottom. You don't want this yeast to settle up in the neck and in the ring, because when you upright it, you're still going to have that ring up there, and that's going to kind of mess things up when you try to start pouring it. So it's kind of the same. I'm not familiar too much with really storing wine for a long period of time, but is it the same idea? Like dark, yes, but cold and humidity controlled, is that still the same?
So that's a long discussion in cellaring. So dark and not severe temperature changes in a short period of time are the things you want to hit. With wine, you do have to watch humidity because, of course, you don't want to dry the cork out. However, now when people have moved to artificial cork, that's going to become less and less of an issue. So, you also do have to store wine on its side. You don't store wine standing up. I have, and I have had okay experiences cellaring wine standing up. And the only reason it was standing up was the only place I had in the cellar for it. I couldn't put them on the side. I had to stand them up. So.
Yeah, a lot of that, like the dark is obvious. Light is bad. That's for beer. That's for kind of everything. Cold is also good because heat is also bad. A lot of the conditions are simply just to make sure that the beer has a chance to take care of itself, not have outside influence to really kind of mess with it and make it go bad. There was somebody on this show a good year ago. They said they had a bunch of beers, like 6 of them they got from the LCBO. They really liked it, and then they stuck it in their closet and forgot about it for about a year. And it was hot, then cold, and not ideal conditions, but it still turned out okay, which was kind of fun, which is a testament to the bottling and probably the brewing of said beer.
Yeah. So I've got a real mix of beers down in my cellar. Matter of fact, I'm when I get back from my Thanksgiving weekend, I'm actually going to pull everything out because I've got to make some decisions because I've got well over 200 bottles. Some of them probably shouldn't be in a cellar. Terry had a question about the cap. And normal cap was what was on the bottle. So, now, bottle conditioning, things like what Rob does at Short Finger, he does put the cork in the champagne cork style with the wire cage on it sometimes, because he knows he's going to overpressurize the bottle when it's bottle conditioned. Yeah. And you don't want the person, I mean, think about someone grabbing one of those on a bike and it doesn't have the wire cage on it, riding down the Iron Horse Trail. Yeah. And yes, the high octane beers, they have a tendency to put corks in them. Because they take a lot more stress than a cap does sometimes. So how do you select your beers for the cellar, Mike?
More ones that I'm really interested when I pick out the beer. It's one that I first have to enjoy it first, because cellaring a beer you don't like makes no sense. Like the scented one is really high, not really high, but at least 7% or higher in terms of alcohol content. Ones that are complex enough that I really want to see what they turn into. Like I hate barley wine, but it's very good when cellared. It's just not my thing, but it's still interesting to see what it turns into. So if I happen to have one of those, I'm gonna let that sit for a long time. Imperial stouts, Belgian quads. There's certain styles that just really lend well to cellaring. So I start with those. Andrea,
Don't-
that
don't-
is
Don't listen to the peanut gallery. I know that you don't have Coors Light in your basement cellar.
no, I do not. No, I do not. If it is, it's because someone left it here and now I don't know what to do with it. In a suitable fridge. Wow. Yeah, stouts are the big one. But anything that's really high, typically ales, high alcohol content ales. If you get into the you can do some lagers too. Lagers kind of lend well to themselves. Anyhow, like the Doppelbock, that's a lager, just fairly high alcohol content and a bit more character to it. A really clean lager, it's just going to get cleaner, and there's not really that much to it. So you want to have something that you want to allow to kind of take care of itself.
I know in wines, I will not cellar a high sugar white wine because it's not. I will cellar a well-made Chardonnay that has not been sugar added, and not necessarily cask conditioned either. It hasn't sat in oak for a while, because it will bring out a different set of tones in it. But I hear what you're saying with that. You don't cellar APAs and IPAs too often.
No, not really.
Because those tones disappear very quickly.
Yep.
Well, and we've had guests on the show who talk about the fact that they like to serve their beer fresh, period. Like that we're not interested in it being 2 months old. It needs to be fresh.
Yeah, more and more you see on all the cans you get drink fresh, enjoy fresh.
Yeah.
And fair enough. Like the IPAs and APAs typically are better enjoyed fresh. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And also they when you sell it, if you have it at your brewery, and everybody has said it here, they can it, it's now out of your control once it leaves your door. Like, I really hope that it gets stored properly. I really hope that I just drink it quickly so it doesn't have a chance to go bad, if for whatever reason that may be. Canning and bottling inherently gives some oxygen in there. Don't want that to run rampant. So
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the reason the big guys put preservatives in their beer. Once it leaves their facility, they have no idea what the temperature extremes are going to be, whether it's going to sit in sunlight. I mean, you buy your case of Coors and you throw it on your back porch and it gets sunlight for 6 hours of the day.
Yeah.
It's definitely not going to be a good beer to drink later on.
Nope. Or before that, or at any point in time.
Yeah.
Sorry for any Coors fans, but don't think they're on the show. Yeah. Besides that, I typically go for the big, huge, strong ones, because ones with lots of flavors, I want to see what they transform into. So I stick to the imperial stouts and the big, super malty ales. That's really what I tend to. Like I said, I'm not a giant barley wine person. You have a background on, Terry, so it's kind of hard to see with that. Please hold. Yes, Coors is an excellent source of flavored water. Yes, like a hop water.
Hot water is better.
What's your preferred Cellaring beer? Like what's the greater than 50% or the majority of your cellar right now in style?
So I have a tendency to buy Rob at Shortfinger his oddball beers that he puts out every so often. And I usually buy 3 of them, and I throw 2 in my cellar because I want to see what happens to them later on.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with Aaron at Little Beast.
Oh,
I've got at least 20 beers down there that I've been waiting for friends to come and visit so I can pull them out and we can try them and see what they come out like. So I have a number 1, yes, Russian Imperial Stouts. Number 2, high octane. It doesn't have to be a Russian Imperial, but just a high octane, well-made stout, a well-made porter, the Doppelbocks, anything with a lot of like back-end smoke or earthiness to it will sit well in a cellar. But if you were to go down in my cellar right now, the vast majority are actually sours.
Yeah, I've never been that big of a sour fan. My wife is, but not me. So I've never really had enough sours on hand to actually go and cellar it. So what Are these highly fruited sours, or are these fairly neutral sours? Like what do you have? Or a good range?
So I have a good range. I grabbed a bunch of the sours that Lager Dave made
Hmm.
early on in the pandemic when he first got to Elora. I grabbed a bunch of those and threw them in the cellar. The first time I stopped in to Little Beast to talk to Erin to get her on the show, I actually met her former partner and picked up all 12 beers that they had at that point and threw them in the cellar. And then when I went back and talked to Erin, grabbed 6 more because they had 6 new beers on. And so those are all actually sitting in the cellar waiting. I got to pull them out from the back and decide, okay, so which ones am I going to try?
Yeah, I guess sours I'm pretty unfamiliar with, because like we've been saying, high alcohol content because it's a preservative, big, boozy, lots of flavor. But sours are a bit different simply because their pH is so low. That's the preservative by itself. So the alcohol percentage thing doesn't really factor at all. But I honestly don't know what happens to a sour as it ages.
So Saison d'Ete, which is the one that I brought
Good one.
when she was on the show. Not and then when she showed up at Reverence, when we were live at Reverence, we cracked that open at the end of the show and tried it. And then we tried her newest version of it. So the one I had was a 2020 versus her 2022, which is the rename. And I've forgotten the rename.
Yeah.
And because I told her I had it and I would bring it so we could try it. And it was quite different between the two. The sour had mellowed down quite a bit, and to the point where probably if I'd left it another year, there would have been some off flavors in it that wouldn't have been good.
Interesting.
But the when you drink a sour, a lot of people just hit the tartness and they don't get the fruitiness that's behind it because the tartness sucks their mouth dry.
Yeah.
And so what it did was it accentuated the back end tones of all the fruit that was in it, because you're losing the front sweetness.
Yeah.
Just like you would in any beer, you're losing the front sweetness. So
nice. That's interesting. So do you kind of intend to do the same thing? Because you said you have basically almost one of each. So you can do the same thing another year from now to see how they all change? The Little Beast ones in particular, I mean, because she has quite a range of sours.
So I haven't decided whether I'm just going to crack them when someone's here and try them, because I've got tasting notes from the original for myself.
Okay.
And go from that. Or whether I'm going to, pick up a bunch of them and then do a comparative and see. Because there is a big difference between drinking a beer that's freshly made and one that's been sitting for any length of time in a cellar.
Yes.
And there are, I mean, Rob and I have talked about it at Short Finger a couple of times because he's got an extensive cellar of all the beers that he's ever made. And I said, like, sometime you should be pulling those out and trying them.
That would be a lot of fun. He has extensive cellaring and aging.
Well,
that's what he is. That's what Short Finger is. Really fun beers that that one's been sitting there for 4 years. It'll be good eventually, or
yeah, he's unapologetic about what he does.
Oh yeah,
he's not interested in educating you. He's just, this is what I do. This is what I love. You either get it or you don't.
He doesn't like I gotta make a beer other people like. Gotta make a pale ale. Gotta make a lager. I want to go make a 4-year-old lambic that's been blended 8 times.
Rob has. Yes, you're right. Those are exactly the ways. I've heard that comment. I've heard that comment when I've asked them to do a collab with me. I'd like to make this beer, and it's like, oh man. But he has made other beers now. I mean, he has. Yep. The pandemic forced him into that, having to make IPAs and APAs and brewing beers and he's good at it. He's got a good understanding of how his system does that. But yeah, he had to be kind of forced into it. So in answer to your question, Derek, what do my tasting notes look like? So I'm going to give you my tasting notes. Mike, I'm going to go to the Bach now.
Okay. Yeah, that's good timing.
I should probably go get some water because the slight acidity of the wee heavy is coming through. So my tasting notes will look like this, Derek. There's an astringency when I first take the nose of the Bach. And I'm definitely getting plum, which was something that was not in there originally. And there's a little bit of a hint of red raspberry right on the front tone, just as you start breathing in. And all of the back tones that I really, really liked about the Doppelbock don't seem to be in the nose.
Yeah, that's a lot sweeter. For some, I don't know, or I'm perceiving it as sweeter. But maybe
it's interesting. That is definitely not the way I remember the Doppelbock. The caramel has gone almost to milk chocolate, which is along the edges of your tongue.
Yep. What's the one that's kind of like you described that as a rainbow across the back of your mouth?
So after milk chocolate is cocoa.
Cocoa.
Yeah, versus Dutch chocolate, which is dead center.
Yeah, there's a fruit flavor in there that I can't quite pin down.
So Derek, I do keep my notes on paper. There, I have books, two sets of books. One is the stories that I write to my grandkids, but intermingled with the stories that I write to my grandkids are my day-to-day activities, the things that I'm involved in. So when we made the Doppelbock, I went back and I actually took a look at my notes, because what I remember most about that was after Justin and I finished brewing, you always taste the liquor as you're putting it in the fermentation tank. You save some, you do the weight, and then you cool it down and you taste it. What's it taste like? And all I remember was going, oh, Justin, Pouet Fumé, that barnyard taste that you get from certain wines in France. And Graham almost died at that moment. That's like, he hates that. And all he's thinking is we have completely messed this beer up. And Justin and I are laughing because it's like, this is going to go away. Like 3 weeks from now, that's not going to be there. But right now, the only thing you're getting is like, oh my God, I'm standing in a barnyard. It tastes like a barnyard smells. Underlying that, Derek, was a little bit of smokiness. You had to look for it to find it. And the front tone caramel sweetness, which actually was expressed more like strawberry than caramel, was a lot closer to the front of your mouth. But that's also going to go away as it sits in the fermentation tank and the yeast does its thing. And particularly because we were recycling yeast. We actually pulled yeast out of the bottom of another fermentation tank.
Oh.
Yeah, they Justin wanted the particular, I forgot which variety it was from Escarpment. And so we pulled the yeast out of the bottom of the fermentation tank so that we could just transfer it in. My tasting notes for it were exactly as I said. When I got the Doppelbock in the bottle, the first one I cracked, it definite caramel right on the front tone. And then just that slight hint of smokiness, and then all that funky earthiness that was coming through. And the funk was what was left of the Pouet Fumé, which is the front tone of Pouet Fumé. Is funk. So those are all written in my books. Tonight I will sit down and I will write in the book my impressions of these two beers, and so I'll have them. Because that's the only way you can do it. I'm never going to trust my memory. I'm getting too old. Oh yeah, I remember this. smelled like shit. No, I mean,
This is garbage before. There's a note right. It's a bit on the nose as well. I'm trying to identify. It's almost the first thing I'm not sure if it's a nuttiness or like not woody. Woody's a bad way, like an oakiness, but it might be the smoke starting to develop. It's very faint, but it's almost the first thing I taste.
so I call it plum.
Okay.
But if I was going to describe how plum expresses itself, I would describe it this way. There's a slight hint of chocolate on the side of your mouth. There's an awful lot of Turkish coffee, which is right at the back of the roof of your mouth, right where it meets your throat.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a slight hint of smoke underneath. And that is the tannin flavor of a plum. Plum doesn't, a really ripe plum does not have sweetness to it so much as it has a chocolate tone to it. Because it's right at the beginning edges of where bitter starts.
Okay. I really enjoy this one though. I'm a big fan of lagers, so having one that you can actually sell.
I'm
like
going to
this
say
is
that
nice.
I think this has actually fermented a little bit more in the bottle. I think the alcohol content's slightly higher. Either that or there's a lot more effervescence to it because it's almost like a sparkling wine effect when you start drinking it.
What do you mean by that? Like, how would you, for us?
When I first tasted it had almost the effect of I was drinking something that had watered down champagne. So the carbon dioxide molecules were very active, which is why I'm wondering if I don't have the equipment here, so I can't test it. I'm wondering if it's actually got a little bit of a higher alcohol content, which would be rare in this. Now, you might not have gotten that because yours has been out of the bottle into another container, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now that my bottle, it's been sitting here for a bit, I've lost that. Although mine, I cracked my bottles open half an hour ago, or half an hour before the show started. I actually popped them open as well as took them out of the fridge.
It's entirely possible, but depending on how much residual sugar there was left over, it could have just kept, even with the Nessie's Bevy as well. But with a lager, I'm curious as to what the finish gravity was for this particular beer. Because lagers are typically in the range of, 10, 12 points or so. 1.0,
Oh,
1.2
my
or so.
recollection is that we actually thought we were on the low end when we were doing the specific gravity on that. We were hitting 5.8. And we had targeted 6.4. But unfortunately, I didn't write that down in my notes, so it might be my faulty memory. No, Troy did not keep 2 sets of book. Andrea wouldn't let him.
But I'm really enjoying this Doppelbock personally.
Yeah. I've got 1 bottle left, and I'll probably let that sit for another year. I love the way it hangs up on the side of the glass.
Yeah, I was just looking at that actually.
Which is also the reason why I think the alcohol content's actually a little bit higher than 6.4 right now.
Interesting. When you opened up the bottle, was there a lot of CO2 release when you uncorked it? No. That would be a side effect of more fermentation. So I figured that would be rather pronounced.
Yeah, that's why I could be wrong, but it has that effect of.
Yeah.
So, the other thing, maybe they measured it wrong when they bottled it. I don't know.
Well, Derek heard a good CO2 crackle when he opened it. Yeah, I imagine, trying to think, what other styles of loggers could you actually cellar as well? Anything that's any of the doppels, any of the doubles, you could do that too.
Yeah.
That'd be a lot of fun. I'd like to do that with some of mine if I can make something that big. Yeah, cellaring's an interesting thing. It's you usually consider that you let wine and scotch sit. That's about it. So when you tell people, yeah, I've got a beer that's been around for 3 years, they kind of go, are you going to throw it out? Because it's 3 months. That's the timeline that people, if you don't drink it for 3 months, it's garbage. Well, no. But yeah, it's just a certain styles of beer that will lend themselves really well if they're treated and produced properly. You don't have to have a dedicated humidor or some big fancy room. You just need dark, steady temperature, preferably on the colder side, around the 10-degree mark, and just leave it alone for a while.
So the preference is to keep it at 10 degrees. You could actually store them like my cellar. I don't. It's a cellar. They sit on the concrete floor. So they're whatever the ground temperature is, and that's where it stays. Plus, then the air around. I don't control the humidity. If I actually build a proper cellar, I would actually control the humidity as well. But that's more for the wine.
How many of your wine? Yes. Do you have any beer ones that have the cork in it as well? Since you have a lot of short finger, I imagine quite a few of them.
Pretty well everything from short finger has a cork in it. Not all. I've actually got some cans sitting there that every so often I pull one out and try it and go yay or nay. Just been a few that yes, I just poured them down the drain because I should never have put them down there.
That was actually
for the most part, most of Rob's beers, even his regular beers that I've gotten that I've thrown in the cellar, after a year are still reasonably good.
That was actually my follow-up question. Have you ever had one that was just a nope and dump it out?
I've had a couple.
What style were they?
One was a red ale, and it had definitely gone off after 6 months.
Oh. But
the flip side of the coin, I don't know how old it was when I got it because I got it from somebody else. And one was an IPA that definitely the off flavors had started to develop very quickly.
So it was off flavor, and was it mainly oxidation? I that's the most common one, I suppose.
So the red ale was oxidation.
Yeah.
The IPA could have been oxidation, but there are certain hops that the back end tones of those hops, when they start coming through, are actually skunky.
Yeah.
You know, one that really comes to mind is Flying Monkey's first IPA, which I forgot the name of the hop that they use, but it's the closest one to hemp. So now you're starting to move into the realm of, I jokingly used to sell the beer to the engineers going, hey man, this has got pot in it, because it actually smelled like a pot plant. So, but that back end tone of that is actually skunky.
Huh.
You wouldn't know. So when all the other aromas are there, you don't notice that, but the final tone that comes off. And I remember opening the can, pouring it in the glass, and literally going over to the sink and just pouring it in the sink. It was like, not drinking this one.
Nope. Yeah, on the hop profile wheel, there's a bunch of really weird ones that I've never experienced, like catty, cannabis, and like onion and garlic. Like those don't sound good in a hop, but I'm going it from the IPA side of things. So
yeah, so I can't remember which one it was that they were using at Flying Monkey for their first version of their IPA, but it literally, when you first cracked the keg open, smelled like you were pouring a pot plant out. And then as it got a little more oxidation into the keg, it really started to come down, but I can see where that underlying tone would be very skunky. And that would be your first impression.
That's good. Yeah, oxidation to me comes across as wet cardboard. Like, if you ever remember as a kid or adult, depending on how you roll, gnawing on a hunk of cardboard, that's exactly what oxidation tastes like to me. The wet cardboard.
Yep.
Andrea's laughing because you might remember me actually doing that at one point. I'm not sure why. It's happened. It's happened.
Someone once taught me a way to check if your hooch from your still was any good. Slosh around in a glass, pour it out, and just leave the remnants overnight. And in the morning, smell it. And it smells like damp cardboard. It's bad hooch.
Huh. Bad hooch.
Well, that's probably a very good marker, because that's exactly what it would smell like if it was bad.
But what you needed to do is let everything else that might interfere with you smelling the off odors evaporate off. And I don't know why they preferentially did, but I've tried that with some stuff people have given me, and it's true. The stuff I wouldn't drink always smells like cardboard. The stuff that you would drink smells like nothing the next morning.
Yeah. And that's because of the way the aromas work. The tones that are going to give you the good taste are all the ones that flash off first in that process. So.
Yeah, I guess that's what cellaring. You can't cellar everything like we've talked about already, or let's store it for a long period of time for the reasons we've already talked about.
Yeah.
But you have to be really selective as well. And if it's hard to say without being offensive, but if their brewing techniques aren't good, and they are using flavor and malt and hops to mask inefficiencies in their process, you might get diacetyl, which is like, or DMS, which is like butter, like a fake buttery taste, coppery tones, oxidation. There's literally lists of the different ones, but they will start to come through. And the beer just doesn't have its staying power at that point. So being selective on who you get your cellared beer from also matters. Every single one that you've mentioned, Counterpoint, Shortfinger, Little Beasts, they're all outstanding brewers, and that's just they know what they're doing and their processes are sound. I haven't had a bad beer from them at all, actually.
Yeah, that's very true. And if you want to learn more about off flavors, a week on Wednesday, so 8 days from today, at Reverence, True Grist is coming to do an off flavor class.
Those are fun.
Yeah,
I might actually go to that one because my Wednesday's open there.
Yep.
Yeah, you can actually buy an off flavor kit.
Yeah.
Which is just you just take the beer and you go bloop and you drop the appropriate amount in, and this is what DMS tastes like. And it's like you know that fake movie popcorn butter that you get at a theater? That is pretty well what it tastes like. Doesn't go well in beer.
Nope.
Oxidation, I do wet cardboard, and there's a pile of other ones. Yeah. I like the Doppelbock.
Yeah, it stood up really well in the cellar.
Can't cellar everything. T&E have tested that. Breakfast beers, or whatnot, for 3 years. Was it 3 years? You said you had some in there for that long? That's extraordinary. So is there a type of, are there any that you're seeking out that like, I'd like to get this style of beer and cellar this, or have you pretty well covered the gamut of what you like? Have you done barley wine before?
Like you, I'm not a fan of barley wines, so I won't even bother throwing them in my cellar. There are far too many. It's the fundamental thing. There are far too many good beers for me to be bothered with the bar. I find them cloyingly sweet to start with, and that just something. I love desserts, and I've got a sweet tooth, but when it comes to alcohol, I do not like sweet, sugary alcohol.
So ice wines aren't your thing.
You know what? I buy ice wines all the time for my friends. Or as wedding gifts for my friends in Europe. But for me to drink a nice wine, nope, not even interested. Yeah. I'll yeah. But I was the guy when I was in Europe. Every meeting would always ended up with I call it the Turkish coffee, the little puddle of caffeine in a demi-glace. You know, their version of espresso, and everybody would put like 3 or 4 packages of sugar in and be stirring it up. And I'd be sitting there sipping it, going, "What are you doing? Like,
This is great.
fantastic. Why are you putting sugar in it?" And they'd be looking at me, going, "Do you drink it that way?"
Are you a fan then of lactose beers then? Like the ones that are artificial, I say artificially because in my opinion, that's what happens is because lactose is 100% non-fermentable. So that's straight up milk sugar that will carry it all the way through to the other end. They finish up in the high teens and whatnot, and I don't particularly like them.
So I'm trying to remember the Mill Street one. And their oatmeal stout is probably the only one I've ever enjoyed drinking a whole one. And it was because I like my stouts warm, and a lot of the lactose ones you have to drink them ice cold. And it was one of the ones where I could let it get warm and drink it. So
Yep,
And then-
Cellaring sours.
at the same time that one came out, somebody else brought out a raspberry beer. It was heavily into raspberry, and I was selling it as like, here's the breakfast beer. Your oatmeal stout and your raspberry milkshake. Go for it.
Oh,
That's actually a valid question, because no, I do not not all, but most beers with lactose in it, no, I don't enjoy them because they're too sweet.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the sweetness has its place in complementing other flavors. That's about it. It shouldn't be the front. It shouldn't be the leading thing. Like you said, drinking coffee, I want to taste the coffee, not all the sugar that is in it.
Yeah.
But that's me. That's just not my preference.
Well, that's the thing. Taste is always very personal.
Yeah.
So Mike, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you
For all of
having me.
you, those of you who had the beers, I hope you enjoyed them. And we're gonna stop the recording now. I'm gonna bring you up to date on some things that are coming up.